Hello and welcome. You're watching Policy Watch with me, Frank Pereira. India is likely to install 54.7 gigawatts of wind capacity by 2022 against the 60 gigawatts target set by the government, Fitch Solutions Macro Research has said in a report. The country has set an ambitious target of installing 175 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by the year 2022, which includes 100 gigawatts from solar, 60 from wind, 10 from biopower and 5 from small hydropower. The agency also said that it believes that concerns about the economic viability of low-tariff projects from India's wind capacity auctions raise the risk that investor appetite will weaken and auctions will be postponed. According to a year-end review released by the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, in December 2018, India seeks to tender a total of 20 gigawatts of wind capacity by March 2020 with 2-year implementation deadlines in order to facilitate enough growth to meet the expansion targets. However, delays in the implementation of tendered projects and more muted interest in new auctions will present a sustainable hurdle or rather substantial hurdle to fulfilling these envisioned expansion plans, the report said. On this edition of Policy Watch, we will analyze India's wind energy potential. Joining me on the program today are Dr. Srikanth K. Panigrahi, energy expert and Director General Carbon Miners India; Mandvi Singh, Deputy Program Manager, Renewable Energy Centre for Science and Environment; and Ajay Shankar, Distinguished Fellow, the Energy and Resources Institute. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of Policy Watch. Mr. Shankar, I'd like to begin the program with you. Let's first try and put into perspective and try and understand what is India's wind energy potential.
The wind energy potential of India keeps getting reassessed and keeps getting upgraded. So we have, I think, a potential of about 60 gigawatts on wind, and it is quite likely that it would go up substantially because some of the old wind power stations that were put up had very low capacity and low technology. So on the same site, over time, this can be replaced with wind turbines which have higher capacity. Then there's another unexplored area which is in the oceans. Now that across the world is at a nascent stage. India has a bit of a problem because on the eastern side we have a lot of cyclones which hit the coast. So probably on the western side there would be substantial potential, but that is more expensive and that should be tapped towards the end of the build-up of the renewable energy program.
Sure. Dr. Panigrahi, let's talk about policies now. Do we have adequate policies really as far as this particular sector is concerned? What more needs to be done, do you think?
Yes, we have enough policies, and India was one of the early starter in wind energy compared to other nations, developing nations in particular. And India still is in 4th position internationally in overall wind generation capacity, and although solar started taking up with a higher speed, and it is still a little less than the total wind capacity as of now, and but the growth rate in wind energy has reduced compared to solar because of many reasons which we will be discussing. That is altogether different issues of implementation. But so far as policy framework is concerned, we started very well. We initially, government had the national wind power policy, and subsequently both the onshore and offshore wind policies has been developed. And there is also a solar wind hybrid policy also has been formulated. At present, 60 gigawatt is a projected target for 2022, although we have much more potential, more than 1,000 times potential than that of projected by 2022. And as a government policy framework, it has been assessed and seen that solar will be comparatively a low cost proposition so far as energy, renewable energy market is concerned. If you see the tariff of the solar, it is 2 rupees 23 paisa is the lowest bidding price per unit for solar. Whereas is for wind it is 4 rupees 50 paisa or something around that. So this is the one of the reasons why solar is getting a pull from the market side. If you see the onshore projections, we are doing very well. Although, as you told in the introduction, right now the growth rate has diminished because of some reasons. And if you see the offshore wind, we have a policy, a very vibrant policy, which came up in October 2015, known as National Offshore Wind Energy Policy Framework, which encourages the offshore wind exploration. And India is a country having around 7,700 kilometer long coastline, and in all of its exclusive economic zone, we have enough opportunity to harness wind energy. And it is found that by the National Institute for Wind Energy, based in Chennai as its headquarters, that we have western states have a larger potential in terms of stable and steady and speedy wind flow. Like, you know, starting from Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh are the leading states who are ventured into a lot of onshore wind development.
Sure.
And
you know, since you spoke about offshore wind energy, let's focus on that for a little bit, and then we'll move on, of course, to renewable energies and so on and so forth. Let me bring in Manvi Singh into the picture now. With, you know, Manvi, with the right kind of impetus, do you believe that offshore wind energy can be a game changer?
So let's start with where it started. So Europe right now is the leader in offshore. UK and the rest of the Europe combined. And what has happened there is that over the period, the tariff that has recently been discovered in European tenders is actually equivalent to what India's onshore tariff is. But it has not happened overnight. They were supported over the years by incentives, and only now these have been taken away. So that is something that India has to consider very seriously. The challenge is that given the solar right now is incentive free and so cheap, and onshore itself is not as developed, whether and how much money would you want to put into onshore is a call that the government of India needs to take by sort of analyzing its various options. The second thing about offshore I would like to say is that the policy is very welcome, but right now is slightly sort of bare-boned, in the sense that you have a target of 30 gigawatt by 2030, which I think needs to be supported more strongly by the policy. What happens with offshore is that it entails a lot of data collection before you actually venture into it. For instance, Germany, before it started its first few projects, had put in really nearly 8 years of time to just collect the Met ocean data, the geological data, because it is risky. You don't know what is, it's certainly riskier than your onshore projects and this and that. So that is something that the policy needs to look at. Besides that, with onshore, a lot of investments need to go into the support infrastructure development. So the transmission line, right now the policy, for instance, says that the grid development, the subsea cabling becomes the developer's responsibility. Now, I doubt if developers in India sort of, if the bidding right now, they did put out a project which has not yet been allocated as far as I remember. Delinking grid development and the generation component development is something that Europe has also done. So I think that is also something that the policy needs to consider and take it forward. So offshore, while it has a lot of potential, it will take time to sort of come up.
Okay. Okay. It'll take time to come up is what you're suggesting as far as offshore is concerned. So, Mr. Shankar, should we continue to invest in this offshore, or rather these offshore wind energy projects? Because there have been several pilots that have been run in this particular decade, right from the one in 2013 at Rameshwaram. Then we have the offshore policy as well in 2015. What have the results of all of this been, and should we continue to invest in it?
So I think she is right that the investment that is needed in offshore is a lot of expenditure of public money in giving a good map for potential investors of what the wind conditions are and what the geological conditions are. Because the investor in any sector does not have the patience or the willingness to spend a lot of money in understanding the business proposition. So the next few years should be used by India to create all the data so that any investor anywhere in the world can take an informed decision. And as I had said in my earlier remarks, that we should first fully exploit the onshore potential, which would be cheaper. And my own hunch is that even having a newer windmill at an old site where an inefficient windmill was there at a lower height would still be cheaper. And in the last lap of the takeover of renewables of our electricity generation, we should go full steam on offshore.
Okay.
That would be the right sequence.
Okay.
So full development of the existing onshore potential, then the refurbishment or the replacement of older windmills, and then going offshore at full speed.
Okay.
And at each stage, I think we should build on what we've already achieved, which is we get competitive private investment to drive the program.
Sure. Yes.
And that is happening without subsidies and can happen without subsidies.
Okay. Right.
Yes, in offshore wind energy sector, the government of India has allocated already 10,000 crores as the initial seed money from Clean Energy Fund, which is basically collected from coal cess. And this, out of which 40% of it has already been allocated in first phase. And as a first project of the commercial project of the offshore wind, there is a project has come up recently in November-December 2018 in Gujarat. And a lot of experimentations and pilot project is going on by National Wind Energy Institute. And even those who are potential bidders, which are largely of foreign origin, they have their research station based in many parts of Tamil Nadu, Gujarat and Karnataka coast, which are engaged in research and collecting information and database. The offshore wind energy technology has become made very simple by scientific innovations, and it is basically floating windmills which will be float within exclusive economic zone, and below that there will be a a processor which is basically turbine which will generate electricity and pass on to a offshore substation, and this process is very simple, transmitting energy from this underground turbine to the underground offshore collection point or the power plant.
Sure.
This is the offshore technology. India has a great potential, and it will prove beneficial, and government has already invested the initial seed money, and we need to capitalize both the offshore as well as onshore.
Okay, right. Manvi Singh, before we broaden the scope of the discussion and talk about other renewables as well, let's talk about the challenges in the wind sector, and what are they and how can they be addressed?
Okay, so as Sir had started talking about it, For the past 3 years, there's been a lull in the wind power sector. 2016-17, we added around 5.5 gigawatts. 2017-18, it got down to 2 gigawatts, less than 2. And again, 18-19 also was similar, which is a really bad signal, because it essentially means that in the next 18 to 20 months, you have to auction out at least 20 gigawatts in order to meet your target of 60 gigawatts. Now, what is happening in wind sector is that it is right now in a transition phase as far as policy is concerned. So we started with, when the growth of wind really picked up was because of incentives like accelerated depreciation. Then it came in the generation based incentives. The government has gradually taken these away, and now the focus is on auctioning of wind projects. Now the thing about auctions is that we did come out with the framework in December 2018, I believe. Not 18, 17.
17.
Yeah, December 17 for auctioning of wind projects. Now the thing is, the mechanism is similar to what they did in solar, but the challenge is with respect to this tariff determination process that the government of India thinks is right, in the sense that there is a ceiling imposed on every auction. So the thing is, when the first wind auction happened in 2016 or 17, the result came out, it was rupees 2.4 per unit is the tariff discovered, which government of India sort of took as a signal of, this is the appropriate price. But the challenge becomes that with wind, because it's so location specific, achieving that same tariff becomes again and again difficult. So we have seen string of auctions announced in the past 6 months, 12 months, that have eventually either been resized, reduced, or have been cancelled altogether. Because the bidders have not been able to sort of match what the government was expecting in terms of the lowest tariffs. So there is that contention going on. Besides that, the challenge is, there are general challenge with all, which solar also is right now dealing with respect of the DISCOM risk, in the sense that there's continuous curtailment of power generated, despite the must-run status that wind enjoys. There is delayed payments that the developers are grappling with. So those challenges, I will not go into detail, because those are the general challenges that the overall renewable energy segment has,
right,
and hence which adds to the risk of project development. But the key challenge right now in terms of capacity allocation is the fact that tenders are not, see, the government of India needs to understand that you have to trust the market. It is the market which has led to such low tariffs for solar as well as the wind. So imposing ceiling sort of leads to an arbitrary sort of curtailment of that free flow of market mechanism, which is causing problems right now.
Sure.
Plus there are land challenges. If you have read, Gujarat is, there's been in the news, but otherwise also the best sites are not, is all taken up, as Sir was saying. So the new sites reaching such low tariffs on these remaining sites might not be
feasible.
easy. Yeah.
All right.
So developer concerns essentially remain unaddressed as far as these are.
Let's broaden the scope of the discussion now and talk about renewables as a whole. Mr. Shankar, especially considering what's happening in the Middle East, let's not forget that, India is a nation that needs its energy to come from outside. So considering especially what's happening in the Middle East at this point in time, is it more necessary then for us to concentrate on renewables?
I think not only the problem in the Middle East, but for mankind's survival itself, India needs to be far more ambitious on renewables, and it should have the confidence to be far more ambitious, because following Paris, what we have achieved is extraordinary. We are well on track on overachieving on our Paris commitments. And when we agreed on ambitious commitments in Paris, there were many people in India who thought that we had been too ambitious and probably we will slip, as we slip on many areas. So today I think we as a country, we are at a stage where we can really choose to be far more ambitious than we have thought of being till date. So like if you ask me personally, I would say we should take the challenge that we'll be on the first 5-10 countries in the world which get rid of fossil fuels altogether from energy generation.
And it's doable.
Why not? Why not?
Absolutely.
I mean, you take 1 megawatt of solar in every village, you have 600,000 megawatts of solar power potential, and all possible through private investment. But on private investment, I think she's raised a very valid point, and I think we need to highlight it and need to debate it. Government, for a variety of reasons, and we in the media or on public forums are responsible for it, has become a prisoner to the proposition that prices or tariffs have to only go down. Now, economic history shows that it goes down and goes up, whether it's real estate, whether it's oil or anything. So if you have a competitive market situation, and if for any number of reasons the prices go up, government should be willing to live with it. Now in government, somehow there is this siege mentality that if I have discovered one price in the market, I cannot accept anything which is higher. This needs to go. Because for a variety of reasons. She rightly said you can bid at a project site where the wind potential is actually lower.
Right.
Or where the land conditions are difficult. Or the international market has changed. After all, if you take solar, all our solar panels are imported from China. Now if the Chinese solar panel prices go up, then there is no way anybody can match the existing price.
Right.
Or the currency depreciates very sharply, which it can happen. Or we choose to pursue domestic manufacturing. So if you pursue domestic manufacturing, you will have to pay higher prices.
Sure.
And we should be willing to pay for it because both solar and wind prices have become so attractive that we can today actually seriously think of phasing out conventional fossil fuels from electricity generation by 2040, 45, 50, 55.
Sure.
But it's time we had began discussing that seriously.
Absolutely.
Rather than looking at the Paris target as great and so we are virtuous people in the world.
Yeah,
we should look at becoming global leaders.
Absolutely, absolutely. And how can we be global leaders? What needs to be done, do you think, Dr. Panigrahi? And you know, what is the potential really as far as renewables are concerned?
The potentials so far as renewable is concerned is huge and enormous because renewable energy is absolutely free. It comes from nature, and considering wind energy in particular, we have enough opportunity to capitalize the untapped potentials both in offshore and onshore. And the wind associations, various associations, they are demanding that the kind of the government tax holidays which were given at the beginning and kind of accelerated depreciation of 80% or generation based incentives 50 paisa per unit of production up to, with a cap of 10 million rupees per megawatt. So which are given initially period and slowly those has been cut out. They are demanding the same thing again because of newer challenges which has been discussed. And compared to overall renewable energy perspective, after 2022, the next 5-year plan comes at 2027, and in which from 175 gigawatt, which has been targeted by India, it is targeted 275 gigawatt will be coming from renewable energy sources. And there are action plans also to achieve that are in place. And these action plans and our commitment to Paris, which Sir has recently quoted, in Paris agreement in our own intended determined contributions, INDC, National Determined Contributions, India has committed 33 to 35% reduction of carbon intensity from its GDP with respect to 2005 target. That is number one. Number two is 40% of energy will come from non-fossil fuel sector. Non-fossil fuel sector is comprised of renewable energy, nuclear energy as well as hydro sector, and which is quite possible, and it has been experimented in many ways and it has been seen that it is quite possible because recently we have around 16% of renewable energy production right now as of today, and whereas 14 to 15% of hydro production and 2% nuclear.
Sure.
So compared to global scenario in solar and wind, India's position is still in attractive position, and we have a potential market which is growing.
Okay, there's tremendous potential and we're sitting in a pretty place is what you're suggesting. So what progress, Mandvi, has been done over the years as far as renewables are concerned in the country?
Oh, tremendous. Like both my panelists have been saying, we have, especially if you look at solar, the growth has been unprecedented. The way we've progressed, and it is, you have to commend like Government of India, where sort of credit is due, that this whole announcement of this 175 gigawatt target was game changer for us, because it gave the market signals that we are serious about this transition. And it was not just a broad announcement, it was backed by serious moves, like, you set up SECI to auction out projects. There was like a very methodological way behind it. You were willing to give incentives, and the market responded. And it came at a great time because the prices of panel across the world were falling. So we were able to come down from a price of 14 rupees per unit for solar to a price of 2.5 rupees per unit in a matter of 7 to 8 years. That's a great achievement. I doubt if there's any other market that has seen that kind of transition, because it has not been just driven by incentives. This transition was supported by incentives but driven by the market. So that is something which is commendable for us. And in terms of the capacity addition, it went up from around 1 or 2 sort of megawatts of solar to now almost 30 gigawatts of solar.
Right.
So in that sense, this is a remarkable achievement for India. And what has happened along with this is that now these incentives, the capital incentives that the government was giving to solar, has also been weaned off. And the tariff itself is now standing on its own without the support.
Sure.
So that's commendable. What is lacking is what is happening in wind and what is happening in other sectors. So a similar sort of a mission-driven approach towards wind is actually needed going forward for it to be more balanced.
Right.
And there is merit to solar and wind sort of developing in a complementary manner, because from a grid security perspective, wind is better in monsoon, solar is not. Wind is better at night, solar is not there. So from a grid management perspective, also your investment requirement in storage or from thermal flexibility will be much less if they are developed in a more complementary manner.
Sure. All right. Quick closing comment from you, Mr. Shankar, before I wrap up the program, about the best way forward so as to ensure that we meet our ever-increasing energy needs.
I think the next stage forward is to move aggressively on storage. So there is the solar thermal technology, where with molten salt you can store energy and generate electricity in the night. So we need to bid out some projects for that and have learning in the country. We need to bid out some battery projects so that we get the learnings on grid management and begin the process of driving down costs of storage, as we did in solar and succeeded.
Sure.
In storage, we may not get such dramatic progress in bringing down costs, but we should be on the global frontier of bringing down costs and deploying storage.
All right.
Because that will be essential if we have to actually get rid of fossil fuels altogether.
All right. With that, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Policy Watch. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. We'd like to hear from you as well. Do share your feedback with us. Our email ID is policywatch.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Policy Watch. See you again next time.